My name is Akila Tate, and today I'm going to be talking about the city of Anderson, South Carolina. So, to get started, Anderson is located in upstate South Carolina along I-85, halfway between Atlanta and Charlotte, and it was founded in December 1826 and incorporated as a city in 1882. The current population is home to 31,323 people. So let's start off by talking about Anderson's past. Anderson started out as a courthouse town, and the arrival of the Greenville and Columbia Railroad in 1856 led Anderson to become a center of the Piedmont region's late 19th century industrial expansion. And then in 1890, the first of several cotton mills was built on the outskirts of Anderson, and mills soon surrounded the city. By 1900, Anderson had joined Greenville and Spartanburg as the leading textile manufacturing centers in South Carolina. During the peak of the textile boom, Anderson County housed 19 textile mills. And so these textile mills had a very big impact on the economy. They created industrial employment, attracted workers and investment, shifted the economy from agriculture toward manufacturing, and they were extremely profitable with Toxaway Mill located in Anderson, generating an annual product value of $265,000 within its first 4 years of operation. The employees, however, did not see this economic success reflected in their income, as they were only paid an average of $5.38 a week. And most Anderson mills paid their workers in company scrip, which could only be spent at company-owned stores. The scrip system often trapped workers in a cycle of debt because prices at company stores were high and workers had few alternatives. So there were also social impacts of these mills. Until the late 1960s, Anderson mills were segregated and only white people were allowed to work in them. And so many mill workers were low-income working class white residents who had limited access to formal education and few economic opportunities outside of mill employment. Mill owners constructed housing for their workers within walking distance to the mill, and the homes had water and electricity supplied to them. And they also had churches and schools, and so that's how we got the term mill villages because it was like a little village built around the mill. And so these workers' like whole lives pretty much revolved around the mill. And in exchange for nominal rent, um, for each room that a house had, a worker was required. And so, since most homes were occupied by a family, children often ended up being used to meet the company's worker occupancy requirement. And in South Carolina, at the turn of the 20th century, children were permitted to work at any age in the summer months, and the only stipulation was that each child attend school for at least 4 months a year and could read and write. And so there were a lot of child workers in these mills, and they were not paid a lot. Um, so yes, like I was saying earlier, these mill villages were colloquially referred to as mill hills, and they often included stores, schools, churches, and recreation. They had organized sports, and so they would have these sports teams, and the different mill sports teams would compete against each other. And because of this, these workers were able to form strong, close-knit communities. And while mill villages did offer affordable housing and community support, companies also controlled many parts of daily life because there was kind of no work and home separation. And so, as also, these mill workers were isolated from the rest of their community. And so, it's kind of like if you're in a city and you have this one community that just stays in this one area, and there's like all these people and around them, it's kind of like you're living in like two separate worlds, you know? And so they were very isolated from the rest of what was happening around them. And also the working conditions in these mills were not great. the cotton fibers created serious occupational breathing hazards for workers. It was very hot and dusty inside of these mills, and so it was hard to breathe, and many people had to work with a mask on. So these mills also had a few environmental impacts. And so first we're going to talk about water pollution. Um, the wastewater collection system in the city of Anderson dates back to the 1910s or 20s, and the first sewer collection and outfill lines were directed to the Rocky River and Whitner Creek with no treatment. But by December 1972, the EPA recorded an enforcement and pollution abatement action against Dan River Incorporated, located in Anderson, South Carolina, regarding industrial textile waste discharged into the Rocky River by the company's Haynesworth Mill. And so what this meant was that the company had to meet federal pollution limits by 1974, and they planned to do this by connecting their facility to Anderson's municipal water system. And so at that point, Anderson did um, start using water treatment plants. And so they were still sending water to the Rocky River, but this time it was going through treatment before being discharged. And so the mills also released air pollution, and they relied on large combustion boilers for steam and power, which led to them releasing soot, sulfur dioxide, and ash into the air of these local neighborhoods before the modern Clean Air Act regulations were enacted. And then lastly, we have our soil pollution and just kind of overall community pollution. And so in 1999, the EPA described the 13-acre former Anderson Mill property as being contaminated with heavy metals, other chemicals, and leaking drums. Then we have the 8.6-acre Riverside Mill property on South Gossett Street in Anderson, and that has soil contaminated with polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons. And then we have the environmental assessments that were done on the 13.7 acre of former Toxaway Mill property. And it was found to have semi-volatile organic compounds, inorganic contaminants, metals, and contaminated debris. And so these mills did leave the sites that they were built on very contaminated and not healthy for the community. And so now we're going to shift from talking about the textile industry to hydroelectric innovation. So Anderson is nicknamed the Electric City, and they have this man, William C. Whitner, to thank for that nickname. He was born in Anderson in 1864, and the city hired him to develop a municipal water and electric system. And so, in order to do this, he consulted Nikola Tesla, who was from New York, and he was up there working on electricity and being able to power things. And so he went there to interview him, and he took what he learned from his conversation with him and brought it back to Anderson. And so in 1894, he installed a 5,000-volt hydroelectric generator on the Rocky River, and this system powered Anderson's water pumps, streetlights, and several local industries, making Anderson the first city in the U.S. to have a continuous supply of electric power. By 1897, electricity was being transmitted from Portman Shoals, approximately 11 miles, to Anderson Cotton Mill, making it the first large cotton mill in the country to operate using electricity generated at a distance without step-up transformers. And so these this new hydroelectricity that the city was using came with its fair share of impacts, and the economic impacts were that electricity supported industrial expansion and made Anderson more attractive to manufacturers. Productivity increased in mills because people could continue working even when it's dark outside. Um, Portman Shoals Power Plant was the start of what became Duke Power, which is now Duke Energy, and it's one of the largest energy companies in the country, and it serves South Carolina, North Carolina, and yeah. Then we have the environmental impacts. And Anderson used flowing water to generate electricity rather than relying entirely on coal or steam. So we're getting into the early days of using renewable resources as an electricity source. And then we had less air pollution from mills because they are now powered by hydroelectricity and not letting out bad things into the air. And then also we have our social impacts of electricity. Um, we had electrics, street lights and water systems, which changed how residents experience the city. And power company directors created the Anderson Traction Company in 1904 to operate electric trolleys. And they ran lines to mills at the outskirts of town and into main residential areas, which connected Anderson and brought the city together. So, although electricity and textile manufacturing brought Anderson prosperity, access to that prosperity was deeply unequal. And so we're seeing unequal growth with segregation in work, housing, and education. And so, like I said earlier, mills and mill villages were only employed and housed by white workers. Black residents were excluded from many higher paying industrial jobs. Schools were racially segregated, and Black schools received fewer resources and opportunities. There was redlining, which caused to discriminatory lending and restricted Black home ownership and neighborhood investment. And then there was segregation in employment, housing, and education, which contributed to lasting wealth and opportunity gaps. So, unfortunately, in Anderson, Black people just had a lot of setbacks and a lot of systemic racism that just stopped them from being able to reach the same success as their white counterparts. So, Anderson's present, what works well and what challenges the city could overcome. So, with strength right now is expanding housing choices. And so, new residential development is adding housing to the city, and community members have expressed concern for a wider variety of housing that can accommodate families, young adults, and older residents. And the median household income in Anderson is $46,933. So prioritizing affordable housing is really important. And an example of Anderson actually implementing this is the Aston Point Apartments, which are affordable. It's an affordable housing development that opened in 2025. Then we have another strength, which is electric city transit, and that is Anderson's bus system. And so they have bus routes that serve different areas of Anderson. The routes connect residents with healthcare, schools, shopping, and public services. And there's also Request a Bus service, which particularly improves access for seniors and residents with disabilities. And one thing that I do recommend is that Anderson should build on this existing asset by adding evening and weekend service, just so more people can use it and be able to get around the city at different times. And so those were things that are working well for the city. And now I'm going to talk about some present challenges that we have going on in the city. And that would be redeveloping Anderson's industrial legacy. The former mill and industrial sites remain vacant, and they are now brownfield sites. And what a brownfield site is a previously developed property where the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse is complicated by the presence or potential presence of hazardous substances, pollutants, or contaminants. And contamination assessment and cleanup is expensive, and that leads to abandoned properties, which contribute to blight and neighborhood disinvestment. And redevelopment can take years because it requires funding, cleanup, and coordination. And so, Anderson was actually granted $300,000 from the EPA, and this funding is supposed to go towards basically just cleaning up these sites. Um, It's going to clean up two former mill sites, former steel manufacturing and storage buildings, dry cleaning properties, and an abandoned garage and service station. So it's really exciting because and nobody wants to live somewhere where they're constantly driving past like old, broken down buildings, dilapidated buildings. People just don't like to see things like that, and you have more pride in your community when it looks nice. So that's really good. My recommendations for brownfield remediation include converting these cleaned sites into mixed-use developments. A lot of them, because of their contamination, even after cleaning it and stuff like that, it's not recommended that they be converted into single-family homes. And so mixed-use development would be the best use of the property. And so that would include housing, businesses, parks, and community spaces, and being able to preserve the historic mill features when possible would also be really cool. I provided an example of Judson Mill in Greenville, South Carolina, and that mill has been converted into lofts, restaurants, and businesses. There's an old warehouse there that features office spaces. I'm actually doing an internship this summer, and my company works there. Our office is located there, and we actually worked on the site as well. So that's really cool. And yeah, there's a rock climbing gym, a small community grocery store, just all types of things that can bring the community together and turn this thing that once was like an eyesore into something positive for the community. And so another challenge that Anderson has is building a safer, more walkable city. There's inconsistent pedestrian infrastructure with some areas lacking miles of sidewalk, crosswalks, and pedestrian traffic control signals. There's very few available bike lanes, and residents without cars have fewer transportation choices. And seniors and people with disability are especially affected here. And so, what I recommend is that Anderson um, expand on complete street improvements throughout the city, work on getting bike lanes in there, work on having more crosswalks. They should prioritize sidewalks and lighting near bus stops, schools, and lower income neighborhoods. We need more ADA ramps. We need pedestrian signals anywhere you can cross the street. We need that. And we need basically, road diets on oversized roads where traffic volumes are low enough. Just bringing everything together and making it a safer experience for the people who are walking. And a walkable city just promotes health and more better social sustainable outcomes as well. So all very important. Anderson's future. I foresee growth beyond Greenville. Right now, a lot of people are moving to Anderson and people are living here because it's cheaper and just making that commute to Greenville. But I think Anderson could be a city where people actually live and want to stay and, do things here. And so, Anderson may continue attracting people seeking a more affordable suburban alternative to Greenville. Anderson University, downtown investment, and new housing could help draw students, families, and businesses. Continued development could make Anderson comparable to growing metro Atlanta suburbs such as Kennesaw. However, residential growth must be supported by jobs, businesses, transportation, and public spaces. What I recommend for future growth is just to expand green infrastructure, including trees, parks, trails, and stormwater features, improve walkability through sidewalks, lighting, crosswalks, and connected streets, encourage commercial development alongside new housing, attract restaurants, shops, offices, and entertainment options, and focus on development around downtown and existing neighborhoods to limit sprawl. Also, Anderson needs to be able to maintain affordable housing as demand and property values increase. So, thank you for listening to my presentation. That's all I have to say. And yes. Bye.